Hi, everyone, and welcome back to California Transportation 101, a comprehensive overview of how transportation works in California. This work is sponsored by NRDC, so big thanks to them for supporting this work and ensuring that we can all have a better understanding of this landscape. I'm Jeanie Ward-Waller, your host for this series and Director of Transportation Advocacy with Fearless Advocacy. And this is part 6. So this is the last part in our series. We're going to talk about, as we head into 2026, what are some key upcoming opportunities for advocacy? And this is just a short snapshot of the agenda for this part. I'm going to talk about opportunities for advocacy at the California Transportation Commission. I'm going to talk about some key work around transit funding. I'll talk about sustainable communities, or the effort to reform the Sustainable Communities Act, SB 375. I'm going to talk about how our gas tax is declining in an effort to replace the gas tax with new funding mechanisms. And finally, I'll just generally talk about ways to get involved in legislation and budget advocacy. All right. So with the CTC is a place that we focus often because this is really the public venue, the public board that is responsible both for oversight of Caltrans as well as awarding a lot of our state transportation funding. Many advocates who work in this space have been advocating to changes to the major funding programs that CTC is responsible for awarding. So in late 2025, CTC just kicked off their guidelines update process for the Senate Bill 1 competitive funding programs. We will be very focused on ensuring that those programs are aligned with CAPTI, aligned with our state goals, and continue to move away from funding things like highway expansion, which are not aligned with the direction that the state is headed. Also in 2026, the CTC will be adopting a couple of major funding programs, the STIP and the SHOPP, or the State Transportation Improvement Program, and the State Highway Operation and Protection Program. Both of these programs invest, many hundreds of millions. The SHOPP is several $1 billion each year. So these are major investments that the state is making, and we keep a close eye on what gets invested through those programs. And of course, the SB1 funding cycle will be coming next year. The call for projects will be released this year, and then we'll be watching closely into next year what gets programmed. So we're always keeping an eye on CTC and what is getting funded there. Also, every year, the CTC commissioners get appointed or reappointed. And so we're also always working and thinking about nominating good candidates for appointment to the CTC so that we've got folks with good, strong understanding of our climate and equity objectives sitting on that body. And I will just read the little footnote there. Climate Plan Network is really the place where a lot of advocates are organized and working together to advocate at the CTC. So if you're not already engaged with Climate Plan, I really encourage you to do that. All right, another really important opportunity to be engaged is around transit funding. This is a big priority also of the Climate Plan Network. There was a recent completion of the work of this Transit Transformation Task Force, which was established under SB 125. That report was finalized. This slide is a little outdated from the fall, but that report has been finalized and was released at the end of 2025 and makes recommendations for public transit funding and reform. And advocates are really gearing up in 2026 to advocate in response to these recommendations to support more funding for public transit. Also in 2026, or in fall of 2025, this new Sustainable Communities Task Force just kicked off. This task force will be meeting through 2026 with the goal of, aligning around recommendations to reduce emissions, align transportation and land use, and take action on our regional sustainable community strategies, which I talked about in the planning part of this series. there's really a need to improve implementation of those sustainable community strategies. So that's part of what this task force is thinking about. The task force kicked off, as I said, in fall of 2025. It's going to meet through at least the first half of 2026 with a plan to release recommendations in the end of 2026 before the end of the Governor Newsom administration. And simultaneously, the regions, particularly the big four MPOs in the state, are also organizing around SB 375 reform with the hope of having legislation move in 2026. So these are efforts that advocates will also be very focused on in 2026. And I'll just make a plug for the Climate Plan Sustainable Communities Work Group, which is where a lot of the organizing and thinking amongst advocates will be happening. I encourage you to get engaged if you're not already in that work. Next, this is a little bit of a longer term effort, but is really fundamentally important to where we're going as a state and how we invest in transportation. This is a work around the replacement of the gas tax and what the future mechanism will be for transportation funding as the gas tax is declining, in part because we are have more and more electric vehicles on our roadways, which is a really good thing for climate emissions. It's not such a good thing for the revenue that we raise through gas taxes that then helps to invest in transportation. And it's a really big piece, as I talked about in the funding section of this series. Significant amount of the funding that we invest in our transportation system, both the state and the local systems, comes from the gas tax. So projections from very reputable organizations like the Legislative Analyst's Office are showing that gas tax could decline by as much as $5 billion a year by 2035. So 10 years from now, we could see a much lower amount of revenue raised from the gas tax on an annual basis. So that really will require us to find another funding mechanism for transportation. The primary mechanism that is being discussed now as the replacement is something that we call a road charge or a mileage-based user fee. So it's assessed based on the miles that you drive, the number of miles you drive, rather than gallons of gas that you consume. And that would be put in place to essentially replace the gas tax, or it could be kind of phased in where it's applied to electric vehicles first, and then ultimately, as electric vehicles become a greater and greater share of the fleet, it will grow and replace the gas tax over time. So a lot of work has been done, a lot of studies, research, as well as pilots that have been run by the California Transportation Commission. And so there's a pretty large group of transportation stakeholders that are looking towards 2030 as, 5 years from now as the date where we want to at least start phasing in the road charge. So again, within Climate Plan, within the group of transportation advocates that are really focused on transportation funding and investment, we know we want to be very heavily involved in this work because it's so important to be continuing to shift how we invest in transportation. And so Climate Plan has developed a set of priorities for how we would like to see the gas tax replacement happen and this road charge be structured. These are three of our kind of guiding priorities, guiding principles for a future road charge. The first is to enshrine equity in the fee structure. So consider having the road charge be income-based so that this isn't a regressive funding mechanism, such as how the gas tax exists today. We also want to ensure that the road charge is continuing to incentivize cleaner and safer vehicle use. So, electric vehicles, of course, are cleaner. They have lower emissions and more fuel efficient vehicles that still use gasoline, pay less gas tax for that reason. So the gas tax is already incentivizing cleaner and smaller vehicles. We want to make sure that incentive continues in the mileage-based fee. And of course, we see this road charge, this big opportunity to overhaul how we're raising revenue, investing in our transportation system, as an opportunity to reprioritize then what we invest that revenue in. So we want to make sure that the investment structure, the programs, and the way we invest in the future is going to be aligned with CAPTI. And you can read more about these principles in the document that I linked to on the bottom of the slide. All right. Generally, I just want to highlight, every year there's new legislation, and within the Climate Plan Network, we're keeping a close eye on both the annual state budget as well as bills and legislation related to transportation and land use. Some of our partners are running those bills, sponsoring those bills. So there's a really key opportunity always to make changes to some of these policies and funding programs that we've talked about through this series by being really engaged in the process. And I think this is my last slide. So I'll just wrap up by, highlighting again, kind of stressing what can advocates do? How can you be involved? It's probably the most important thing that we do is organize, work together, build power in coalitions. And I've said this several times. I'll just say it one more time. Get involved in Climate Plan and the Climate Plan Network if you're not already. We have a number of work groups working on all of these various advocacy opportunities that I've highlighted here. So getting engaged there is really a key way to get up to speed and be heavily involved. We'll be tracking all of these opportunities to influence different things like plans, funding programs, projects. So that's really important. We want to bring more transparency to the processes. So I highlighted the work that Greenlining is doing as an example, where they're mapping this data that Caltrans is releasing and making it more visible, making it easier to interact with and understand. We're always developing, strategic goals and goals of ways that we can work more effectively together. That's really key. Get engaged and comment. In the documents, I talked about, the different phases of a project's development and where you can be engaged, where you can provide public comment. Agencies are required to consider those comments. So getting engaged directly and providing comments at meetings or on planning documents is another really important thing. And finally, this is an area where we're always striving to do better, but telling our local stories and getting the message out to the media, on social media, in all kinds of different forums is really important to helping everyone understand, decision makers, elected officials, the public, why this work is so important and why we need to make change to transportation. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us. This is the last part of our Transportation 101 series. Hopefully you have a better understanding now of all of the different components of our transportation system and also how you can be engaged. So be sure to go back and watch the first 5 parts of the series if you didn't already. And you can find today's slides in the video description. Thank you so much.